the Burning House was released just last Friday. So very new, fresh off the print. And tonight we have a chance to talk about the book. So what's going to be happening is I'll introduce us both. My name is Dhammamegha, and I'm the director of Windhorse Publications, and I've worked with Shantigarbha on this book in its development. And this is Shantigarbha, our great author. So we'll spend about 40 or 45 minutes talking really about the content of the book, and then there'll be a chance afterwards to ask questions, which we'll be doing via chat. So at any point, if you want to put your question in chat, I'll consolidate them. The event is also being live streamed on the YouTube on Windhorse Publications. So that will be available after the event, but you won't appear in the live stream. It's just going to be Shantigarbha and I who appear in the live stream. So, and if you'd like, I can see some of you here are second language English speakers, because I happen to know you. So if you'd like, there's at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little button that says live transcript. And that's an automatically generated transcript. Sometimes it gets words rather funny, particularly names and technical terms. But if you're a second language speaker, or if you have hearing difficulties, it can be quite nice just to be able to have some text to carry on. So maybe introduce Shantigarbha briefly. So Shantigarbha is a long-standing member of the Triratna Buddhist order, 1996, I believe, and given that lovely name, Seeds or Womb of Peace, Shantigarbha. And this is your second book through Windhorse Publications. And aside from being somebody who's a very experienced practitioner, you also got very involved in nonviolent communication, and you're a nonviolent communication trainer. And I think you'll hear that in the content of the book, and also in how Shantigarbha speaks about what he does. And you've also been quite involved in Extinction Rebellion, particularly in training and de-escalation. So I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that as we go along. So welcome Shantigarbha, welcome everybody here, and welcome if you're on YouTube rather than on the Zoom call. It's great to have you here. So it's a really striking title. Actually, I think it's a rather beautiful cover. Okay, our designer Keisha did this cover, which has this lovely bright bold, the burning house. And this burning house is a metaphor that you use in many ways across the book. Maybe you can just start by telling us a little bit about it.
Okay, well, I think it was 2019, and I heard several times, I heard Greta Thunberg saying, I want you to act as if your house was on fire. Do you remember she said it several times to different audiences of world leaders? And it took me back immediately. It took me back to Mitra study, to studying the Mitra study course and the module on the White Lotus Sutra and all the beautiful parables of the White Lotus Sutra, and in particular the parable of the burning house. So it took me right back to that. And I started thinking, that's very interesting. A burning house. Okay, so the first one, the one in the sutra, well, there are two burning houses. One is the burning house of samsara, which is, and the flames are greed, hatred, and delusion. And the other one is, well, in this case, is the climate and ecological emergency. So I started I thought, oh, maybe that's my way into, you know, I wanted to find a dharmic way in, a very specific reference point in the Dharma that I could start to kind of build analogies and start to think creatively about the whole issue. And the parable gave me that, really, because the parable is about how do you get people out of a burning house when they're not even aware that the house is burning. And there's a strong parallel there with the, you know, the climate and ecological emergency. That, you know, my impression is the fire alarm has been ringing for quite a long while. Even before I noticed it, the fire alarm had been ringing, and yet we still haven't kind of responded proportionately to it.
Some of you, some of the people who are here may not be Buddhists. I wonder, it's quite a wide audience of people. I wonder if you could say a little bit about that parable.
Okay.
What's in the parable? And
so in the parable, there's a father who has many children, and he comes back one day, and the house is on fire. He's got a very large house. It's only got one entrance apparently. So, and he's told by his neighbours that the house is that his children are playing inside the house. So he's in a quandary. He's fearful for their life. So he calls to them, "The house is on fire. You're all going to die. You know, come out quickly." And they take absolutely no notice. They just carry on playing with their toys and ignoring him. They don't even know what a house is. They don't know what fire is. Yeah, they don't know what danger is. You know, in the parable. So it's a difficult situation for him. So. Then he's really in despair. He's worried that he'll lose his children. So, then he has a kind of flash of inspiration, and his flash of inspiration is to offer them something even more wonderful than the current toys they're playing with. So he yells to them, "Hey kids, there are some toys outside. They're even better than the ones you've got. And if you come outside, you can play with them until bedtime." Okay, so he makes them a very kind of wonderful offer for what they will find outside, and you know, and how much fun it will be, and how wonderful it will be. And of course, they sort of they're tumbling over each other to get out of the house at that point, and then they're safe. And he gives them all a wonderful toy. So that's the parable. And then the parallel is, well, how do we get people out of a house where they don't even think that the house is on fire? I'm aware the house is on fire. How do I communicate that in a skillful way, in a creative way, so that other people can save themselves? How does that sound, Dhammamegha?
it sounds good. Sorry, it looks like my internet just went down a little bit, so I'm going to put up a little backup plan.
Okay.
But I suppose the question I have from that is, so you've set up a parable, and presumably what you're trying to do is to say that actually just telling people that there is danger is insufficient motivation for us to properly address the situation that we're in.
In the parable, the father makes a cry of anguish. The cry of anguish is, "The house is on fire. You're all going to die. Get out as quickly as you can." That's the cry of anguish. Has no impact whatsoever. Okay, and then then he has a cry of inspiration. There are some wonderful toys outside. So he presents a vision of what life could be like. Let's say, you know. So what I like about that is that parables work on different levels. So a parable enables us, as the Buddha says in the White Lotus Sutra, enables us to get kind of clear understanding about something. We can think on different levels, like, well, what would be our equivalent cry of inspiration? How could we present the Dharma in a compelling way in this crisis? Yeah, there have been previous crises in history. It's not the first generation that we've encountered. I mean, I grew up in the 80s with the crisis of mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
It was very real to me. It was very real. It cast a shadow over my teenage years. So, you know, this is another crisis, and how do we address it? You know, and what could be our cry of inspiration? Bearing in mind that alerting people to self-preservation, telling them to save their own skins, hasn't had much impact, to be honest. You know, worldwide, hasn't had much impact. Even telling people, do it for others, you know, so kind of do it, you know, sort of get out of the house, you know, save the house so that everybody can survive. Again, doesn't seem to have had much impact. So I'm suggesting that alongside those approaches, we also need some kind of cry of inspiration.
You were saying earlier that, you know, the bells were ringing quite a while before
Fire alarm,
the fire alarm was ringing quite a lot before you sort of woke up to it. What was your own sort of path towards writing this book? Well, to getting more involved in the first place, to sort of being able to hear that more, and then actually writing a book about it.
Well, I guess I just felt gradually increasing unease about the whole situation. I'd known about it for a long time. And I just sort of seen the evidence mounting up over the years to the point where it became irrefutable in about, well, I guess I noticed probably 2015, 2016, and then it took me a couple of years to get my act together to sort of, and my way of contributing is to write something. You know, I love writing. So I thought, well, in the end, I thought, well, I need to write something. I need to sort of gather my thoughts and my ideas about this and write something in some shape or form. Yeah. So, and as I say, hearing Greta Thunberg and a friend of mine giving a speech at a rally, a guy called Phil, you'll read about it in the book. Hearing him giving a speech to thousands of people, I thought, okay, I need to pull my finger out now and kind of, and you know, do what I can here.
It was a real privilege and a bit of a white knuckle ride, wasn't it, working on this book? Because we realized in terms of Windhorse production processes that if we were going to get the book out both here and also in the US in time for COP26 and all of the events that are leading up to it, Shantigarbha had to do a write and a second write incredibly quickly. So we had this great work to get it done. And I think what you'll find if you read the book, and I hope you do, in fact, I think Walter's just put a link to where you can buy the book in the chat, is that you have this really great way of moving between sort of stories and reflections on your own sort of motivational history, and then sort of what, in a way, what people can learn and do in their own lives in order to do the book, in order to sort of take action, move forward. I mean, there's lots of books at the moment, aren't there? And there's lots of discussion, obviously, at the moment about what to do from different perspectives. And this is a Buddhist book, isn't it? About what to do, about the nature of the problem and the nature of what we can do as a result. And it'd be interesting to hear what you think about, like, what makes this a Buddhist book? You know, is it a more general book, like this is just basically a sensible, wise way of working with this? What makes it specifically Buddhist?
Well, I've tried to go back to the suttas and sutras, so the Buddhist texts, as much as possible, to see what support or what kind of clarity they can give us. Like, you know, the parable of the burning house enabled me, and it can enable us to think creatively about that issue of how do we communicate, for instance. But so backtracking a little bit to earlier chapters, well, I suggest that we're facing a crisis of empathy. Now, I would say that because my first book was on empathy, so you know, I would kind of approach it like that. But I'd like to fill that out a bit by saying, well, empathy in this context is our ethical imagination. Empathy is our ethical imagination, yeah? So or our moral imagination. Empathy is our capacity to imagine the lives of others and to imagine the impact of our actions on others, and to adjust our choices and our actions accordingly. And I think this really is a kind of at the heart, from a Dharmic perspective, this is at the heart of the crisis, is that we haven't, for one reason or another, been able to imagine the impact on us collectively of our collective actions. You know, so I say, no, it's a crisis of empathy. It's a crisis of imagination. We just, it's like, it's just taking us a little while to get our heads around the whole thing. Mm-hmm. You know, as a individually and collectively and as a species, you know, we haven't had to deal with this kind of global thing, you know, this kind of global phenomenon, this global crisis before. So it's, you know, it's taking us a while to kind of adjust our sets. Yeah, so that's kind of one aspect. It's to do with how we stretch our ethical imagination to taking responsibility further and further out, which is part of the Bodhisattva ideal, that we have a responsibility towards all beings, not just humans, not just animals, but actually all beings.
I suppose one of the things that happens is if we're in a crisis or we're under pressure or we have fear, we tend to shore ourselves up or try to shore ourselves up. So you're talking about a sort of reversal of that process, or an extent.
I mean, okay, well, that's what comes in, isn't it? I mean, you know, when you start talking about this kind of thing, it's all sorts of different things come up, different emotions come up. Sometimes quite a bit of anger comes up when you start talking. I don't know if you've noticed this. People start getting angry about all sorts of things, you know, or they just don't want to know, or they don't want to let it in, even though they kind of know about it. In fact, last week I was talking to people, and they were saying their family members, they kind of don't want to go any further into it. It's like, no, that's enough, because, you know, when we're dealing with threats, it's like we don't want to get overwhelmed and fearful to the point that we can't function, you know. So we want to be able to carry on with our daily lives and, you know, looking after the kids or doing our job or running a Buddhist center or whatever. It's like we don't, so we kind of want to protect that space where we're not overwhelmed and fearful to that point where we're just like kind of, you know, frozen, you know. So just kind of acknowledging that. Something we can do is just acknowledge the kind of fear and overwhelm that can sort of beset us, you know, can sort of come in when we start, you know, considering the scale of it.
We'll come back a little bit later in this conversation to, I suppose, the emotional landscape of a response. And I mean, you were talking about people. I certainly feel many of those things myself. You know, it's not just out there. But I was curious. You have this very, very strong thread in the book that even under the context of anger or frustration or disagreement, you know, all of these kind of ranges of emotional responses, that non-violence is the sort of basic organizing principle. Is that related to, aside from your name, is that related to the Dharma, to your Buddhist practice? Why do you hold so clearly that a non-violent response is the way to go?
I guess because it's the basic principle of Buddhist ethics. You know, non-violence, non-harm, or love of each other, love of the world, is the basic principle, the basic ethical principle. And I guess I've really taken it on board and seen in my own life that if I harm other people, that comes back. That, you know, I experience suffering in the future. There's suffering for myself and for others. You know, so harming and killing, and even ill will leads towards, you know, leads to suffering. So I guess I want to uphold that sense of that kind of principle of non-violence, and also to remember that I'm not just refraining from killing or harming or so on. I'm also cultivating love. So that's kind of the positive side, as it were, of non-violence. I'm cultivating love and compassion towards all beings, and that really has to be the basic emphasis of any kind of, ethical approach that describes itself as, a Buddhist response. Of course, how that unpacks for different people is, could vary. But I wanted to stay with that thread all the way through.
I mean, we had a little in-person book launch at an event last weekend, and one of the things that struck me was how many people were concerned for themselves about how to communicate, or how to engage in the debates, and how to engage with people who have very different views about it. Whether that's sort of climate denialism, or if it's people who, well, I suppose this is one of the questions for you, where your kind of communication background and NVC comes in. Like, how do we engage in these debates that can be very, very heated, where basically there are disagreements about whether or not climate change is anthropogenic, whether it's human created, what the statistics are, what kinds of resources do we draw on in engaging those debates?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm not a scientist by training, so I'm a kind of an informed layperson. And when I speak to people, I try to just check out initially, on what basis are we having this conversation? Yeah, are we having a scientific conversation? Now, in order to have a scientific conversation, probably I'd need to have published several papers on the topic in peer-reviewed journals. That is that level of of understanding. If you want to know about meditation or something like that, you could ask me. However, I'm relying on the people who've spent their lives researching these topics, and the weight of evidence that I see in the scientific debate, and the values which those people those people seem to espouse, which is basically concern about the earth. Yeah? So if somebody approaches me for a scientific debate, I'll ask them, well, what's your background? Do you have papers published on this? What was your PhD? What was your degree? And then we can get some kind of objectivity about who we're talking to, about who I'm talking to. And it turns out most of the time they've read a book. Well, so have I. That doesn't enlighten us. So I would say, in the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha suggested that the Kalamas go on their own experience and the testimony of the wise. And who are the wise in this context? I would say the wise in this context, in relation to this topic, are the scientists, the thousands of scientists who've spent their lives researching the many different disciplines that have gone to, that have led to this scientific consensus about that climate change is the result of greenhouse gases. Those greenhouse gases have been put into the atmosphere by human beings. I don't know, how does that sound, Dhammamegha? Maybe we'll have some questions about this later on.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking, there's the sort of veracity of the knowledge, the reliability of the knowledge base, and then also the fact that actually in some parts of the world, the experience of climate change and other environmental impacts are extremely vivid already. It depends as well.
Yeah, there's no sign of the evidence of that decreasing in any meaningful way. In fact, the evidence is year on year that actually all those indicators are increasing rather than decreasing. And that's been the case for as long as I've been watching it. So I don't see that suddenly changing and going in another direction, unfortunately, sadly.
Yeah. So quite a lot of the sort of arc of the book, you do some reflection for yourself and sort of talk a little bit about your own experience of getting involved in this area. And then you have, you talk a bit about the science and how to engage with the knowledge base. And then a large part of the sort of middle bit of the book, let's say, is actually about working with sort of working internally, let's say, sort of working with knowledge, working with internally. And then, as we'll see later in the book, you go with how to work with others and how to engage in collective action. But for now, let's stick with the working with the sort of emotional states. And you've already spoken about grief and anger, and there's a great chapter in there on humor and keeping your sense of humor, and a sort of stand-up comedy chapter. But maybe you could take two of the, there's a range of those chapters, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the chapter on, say, anger as ways of working with emotional states.
Yeah, sure. So anger and gratitude. So as I said, anger seems to come up quite strongly as soon as you open up a space for this kind of conversation, this kind of discussion. Anger will come in there in some shape or form. And what I suggest in the book is, let's not demonize anger, because people will express themselves in whatever way they know how. So I'm interested in, well, how do we find a life in our anger? Okay, how do we find a life in my anger, other people's anger? What I mean by that is, what's underneath that? What's that anger trying to protect? You know? So anger could just be an explosive expression of frustration. Now, of course, it's likely to be heard as blame and criticism. However, in itself, it could be relatively karmically neutral, so neither skillful nor unskillful. Ill will or hatred is always unskillful from a Buddhist perspective. So we can immediately bring in this distinction of anger may or may not be skillful, we don't know, maybe neutral. Ill will is always going to be unskillful in the sense of leading to suffering for yourself and others. So if I hear somebody expressing what I take to be anger, I'm actually kind of curious to see if I can connect with what's behind that or underneath that, to find the life in it. And more often than not, in this kind of context, it turns out to be things like, well, they want to protect that space for the life they know and love, or they're angry because they want to protect the earth, they want to protect future generations. So there's some kernel of love and compassion in there somewhere, and the question is, can we hear it? Can we get down to it and hear that? If we reject expressions of anger, we're going to be limiting the possibilities for connection. And so I'm just kind of curious to try to engage with all different expressions, whether it's somebody that I agree with or somebody who I regard as one of the people who's doing the things which are harming the earth.
And in the book, you give sort of a process, if you like. You lead people through a process of what to do if they're experiencing anger themselves, in a way to drop, to access the energy of that and be able to use it. But you also give quite a lot of examples, particularly in your work, of de-escalation, of like meeting people's anger and sort of taking it seriously in a way, and getting curious and connecting through anger as well, through that.
Trying to acknowledge the human being, and what's important to them. That doesn't mean I agree with their worldview or the way they're going up about enriching their lives. Nevertheless, try to connect on the basis of common humanity.
Yeah.
And it comes out of that whole thing. My de-escalation work comes out of the nonviolent communication that I've been sharing for however many years, nearly 20 years, and just playing with that, sort of trying to increase my capacity to deal with intensity and intense emotions in myself and in others.
Good. So I'm imagining anybody who's shown up to tonight, or anybody who reaches for this book on a bookshop, or is taken by the title or something like this, would either is already involved and wants to learn more about that, or maybe, like, feels, as you say, kind of dis-ease, is aware of the information, doesn't know what to do, like, what can I do? How does this book help you if you're in that situation, and that, like, what do I do? I care about something.
Yeah, well, just take a bit of space just to kind of acknowledge all the different responses. In the book, I just take, I take various chapters, anger, grief. Grief is another one we haven't mentioned. I think grief is really important. It's like there might be a process of grieving that might go on once we sort of come to terms with, with what's happening. And that can be very healthy in a funny kind of way. I mean, usually we kind of avoid grief like the plague. However, if we lose something that's precious to us, something that we love, there is a kind of feeling of sadness and grief around that loss, and the love that we had of that thing. So a sense of could be quite a healthy sense of grieving, and once we've acknowledged the impact, then some space and some energy for action can sort of bubble up. If we don't go through that process of acknowledgement, of kind of emotional acknowledgement, it's pretty unlikely that we'll find ourselves able to act. It's much more likely we'll be kind of frozen, or kind of, just kind of stuck with, kind of, even a post-traumatic kind of response with the whole thing. Yeah. So once we've got some energy to act, well, there are loads of different things we could be doing. And of course, everybody will engage in different ways. We'll all engage in different ways, whether that's teaching the Dharma with an awareness of these issues, or whether it's supporting activists who are campaigning, as I've been doing, or writing, or talking to friends and family, or changing your personal habits, your personal carbon footprint, reducing that. It's a multi-dimensional issue which needs to be addressed on many levels. There isn't just one level because of the complexity of the issues. We also need the political will for governments to change their policies. Without the political will, they're not going to be, unless it appears to be a vote winner, or at least a vote appeaser, governments are not going to be acting, to address this in any meaningful way. So, yeah. So
you're not advocating one particular response in the book. You're saying, like, actually, there's this sort of array of things to do, and how do you choose? Like, how do you choose?
Don't ask me. I mean, I've just picked for myself. But what I would say is, I would ask the question. I like to ask questions. Okay. So, what is a proportionate response to this issue for you, bearing in mind your other commitments and responsibilities? What is a proportionate response? And that's the question I ask myself. What is proportionate in this case? In in-emergency, we need urgent action, of one kind or another. But that doesn't mean we start running around like mad things, with like headless chickens, because clearly that's not going to help. And the Dharma gives us a lot of support, a lot of practices in order to sit with unease and sit with discomfort. And truly, there is some discomfort here, some tension here. So how do we sit with that tension and unease without losing the capacity to act and to respond?
I mean, some people who are at this event are part of a Triratna Buddhist community, and you've been very involved, I know, in sort of initiating things within Triratna to, I suppose, link the Dharma and this sort of environmental action together. Maybe there'll be a chance a little bit later on to talk about the Earth Sangha, but there's also a bit of a sense amongst some members of our community that this is a political thing, and it's not. And it's not it's not about the Dharma, or it's too political. Like, how do you engage with that sort of response, just within our community in a way?
Sure. Well, I read something fairly recently, and I'll just read it out to you. It goes like this: I think as a movement, especially as an order, we need to take a much stronger stand on issues of this sort, perhaps play a more active role, active part, at least in our individual capacities, in the environmental movement. After all, this is completely in accordance with the principles of Buddhism. In the course of the next 20 years, I would like to see our movement, I would like to see the order developing what I would describe as a sort of ecological dimension. I would like to see some order members taking up this particular interest and working in this particular field from the basis of their Buddhist commitment, working perhaps even in some cases along with non-Buddhists who share this sort of concern, this sort of commitment, because it is something of very, very basic importance. So just take a moment, I just look up at the people who are here. So who said that? Maybe
answers in the chat below.
Answers in the chat, yes. Who said that? Anybody? Angela says Bhante. Yes, it was Bhante. So it's Bhante Sangharachita. Do you know when? Anybody? Make a guess. It was around 30 years ago. It was 1988. So we've missed the boat to some extent, guys. Yeah, 1988. It's more than 20 years. And do you know who he said it to, or what was the context? Anybody?
Order Forum by Natri says.
Order Forum, nearly. Well, actually, the context was the Order's 20th birthday. Okay, on the Order's 20th birthday in 1988, Bhante gave this talk called "The Next 20 Years." The next 20 years. You can look it up on Free Buddhist Audio. In fact, perhaps we could put it in the chat. The talk. He says a lot of things in that talk, a lot of things, some of which we haven't done yet, and this is one of them. Yeah. So we're trying to get our act together to address this issue. Yeah. So I don't know. Is that surprising? Is that a kind of surprising to hear that this is what Bhante said 30 years ago? We still haven't really done it, not collectively anyway. So I'm trying to address that issue with other people. We've decided, okay, we'll try and address that issue now because there does seem to be a bit of a gap there. I mean, individually, many order members have taken action and have changed their habits, and including carbon footprint and so forth. So individually, we've done that. It's just collectively, we haven't really, organized or gathered around this topic.
Before we open up for questions, Shantigarbha, I'm, the book, there's sort of, the book has obviously a lot of writing in it because it's a book. Yuck, yuck, yuck. But there's also a whole lot of other things that come with the book as well, particularly, for example, you do a series of guided meditations and reflections. Do you want to say a little bit about what's in there to accompany the book?
Okay. So as well as kind of the personal story, the personal narrative to frame the book, I also realized fairly early on that we needed some guided reflections to take the whole thing sort of deeper. So at the end of each chapter, I've recorded a guided reflection, which you can download from the Windhorse website, which relates to that chapter. Sometimes it's just deepening what I've written in the chapter, just to give more reflective space for that. And sometimes it's a contrast. So there's one guided reflection after the chapter on the 5 precepts. So applying the 5 precepts to the climate and ecological emergency. There's a guided reflection called "Sitting with Your Shit," and it's a Reggie Ray inspired guided reflection where you just sit with whatever's going on without moving for 10 minutes or so, and some encouragement to do that. So some of the guided reflections are in contrast to the chapter, or to create some reflective space for before we go on to the next chapter. So there's a whole variety of things. Things about developing compassion. One of the things I looked into was, well, what is compassion? And it really surprised me just to remember that compassion is something that we don't develop directly. So this may surprise you. We don't try to develop compassion or karuna directly. We try to develop metta towards suffering beings with an awareness of their suffering. But bearing in mind that suffering is an aspect of their experience. It's not the totality of their experience. Yeah, we focus on the beings, we focus on the person rather than the suffering. And this is a way of staying in compassion rather than falling into horrified anxiety, which we're very likely to do if we start considering, taking into account people's suffering. I mean, my own suffering sometimes seems difficult enough to comprehend or get, take into account without bearing in mind other people's suffering. So there are some very useful things in there in the guided reflections about how we stay sane and take into account that there is suffering in the world.
Maybe just to say, all of the audio files for our books are available. You don't have to buy the book to get access to the audio file. So, even if you don't get the book, feel free to use those as resources for what you're doing. Hopefully you'll buy the book too. But maybe Walter can put a link to the audio resources in the chat box. I'm going to ask Shantigarbha one or two more questions, but if you're, maybe you might want to start thinking about if you have any questions for Shantigarbha, and start putting them in the chat, then we'll have them at hand for when we get there. But I'm just aware, in the book you give so many examples of your work at actions and events in the de-escalation. So I wonder, maybe you just want to talk a little. I'm just curious about, I suppose, your own involvement and what, like your own thinking about the limits or how to engage in highly politicized, very, very public, collective ways in quite heated situations that are very charged. Like what? Maybe just talk a little bit about your own experience of that.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's really important that these kind of, protests are non-violent, because if they're not successful, surely they will become violent. Surely later on people will become violent about this issue. That's my fear, if you see what I mean. So I really want to support the non-violent protests, and so that they succeed, because more violent people will come along later on if it doesn't, if we're still going down the same road. That's my concern. So I chose to contribute, apart from writing a book, I chose to contribute by training Extinction Rebellion members or rebels in de-escalation. So how to keep protests non-violent, even when it's heated, when there's kind of tension between protesters and police and the public and so forth. So I chose to sort of offer my non-violent communication skills in that area to support that holding the non-violent container, as we say, or keeping the non-violent discipline. Well, it's really important to work as a team, to work with other people. So you're not just there on your own, panicking and wondering what to do. And it's really important to stay grounded and to keep some sense of choice about what you could do. In any kind of intense situation, as you said earlier, where and crowds, things can change in crowds very quickly. The mood in a crowd can change very quickly. So it's very important to retain a sense of choice
Mm.
about what you're doing. So I would, when the heat was on, or when it's like when a line of police were pushing a line of protesters into a large group of seated people, for instance, that was one thing that was going on. So that the line of protesters, the standing protesters, were very likely to be falling on the seated ones, endangering them, their health and their limbs and so forth. So I just needed to remember that I have a choice in this situation. Just remind myself, okay, I've got some choices here, and just keep reminding myself I have some choices, and holding up my hands and counting the choices on my fingers about what I can do, so that I don't forget I've got some choices. And in that way, I stay present and I can stay grounded, and and see what will emerge. The danger is that you just freeze, you just lock up and you freeze kind of situation, and that's likely to happen to anybody who isn't really trained in that kind of de-escalation, those skills.
And if I remember correctly, that story, what you did was you engaged the standing people to, in a way, relax in that situation, and in fact reflect on gratitude. And I think there was also a bit of chanting, and then in that way, basically the sort of sense of being pushed, and then the police relaxed, and then there was space for other people to move out the way. So, for example,
we just invited people initially. We just invited people to check in, with like, feel your feet on the ground, feel the earth beneath you, take a breath. The kind of things we recommend in meditation classes. Just get in touch with why you're here, and then a bit later on, I did something about. Then we did, turn to the person next to you, just check they're okay. And then I did something about, what are you grateful for being alive on the earth? And all through that, it lasted quite a few minutes. All through that, the tension just went down like that, just went in the crowd, to the point where we got to kind of Sunday afternoon, sort of, standing around chatting, And the magic thing was that, as we went through that process, the police stopped pushing as well. So they didn't have anything to push against. Once the protesters had kind of relaxed and stopped pushing back, then the police didn't have anything to push against. So they stopped pushing. So there is some magic there.
I'm just reflecting, like, actually, the situations we can land up in those ways can go from sort of mildly troublesome to very seriously dangerous. And I suppose getting involved in this way and building on these principles are ways of training ourselves to be capable in more and more extreme situations if necessary. So it's not like that's a particular example, but We've got a couple of questions, and then I'd like to leave a little bit of room at the end for you to tell us a little bit about the Earth Sangha and other things that might be happening coming up, because I'm imagining some people would want to get involved, or at least know what the options are for getting involved. But for now, we've got 2 questions. I'm just going to go through them in order. You'll probably be able to read them, but in case you're not got your faces right next to your screens. The first one from Abhaya Devi says, if the children in the parable of the burning house represent the people who don't recognize the climate emergency, what are the more attractive toys to tempt them out?
So what are people drawn to, in the sense of, can we offer a vision of what life might be like? The kind of the satisfying or enriching aspects of life that perhaps don't involve a high carbon lifestyle. So we could talk about community, Sangha. We could talk about meaning and purpose. And in a specifically Buddhist context, can we offer a compelling vision of the Dharma that communicates that gets that across? Like, for instance, I like to talk about interconnectedness, the sense that we're all connected, and that all, everything is connected with everything else. And in the Buddhist scriptures, we have the example of Indra's net, Indra's net, which is this beautiful, precious net of jewels owned by the god Indra. And every jewel reflects every other jewel. So that the net is infinite. So the number of reflections in every jewel is also infinite. And this is a kind of way of talking about praticca samutpada, or conditioned co-production, or dependent co-arising. This is perhaps a more kind of ecological way of talking about dependent origination, or praticca samutpada. And just reflect on the ways in which we're connected with all beings, and how our actions impact others, and others' actions impact us. So those are the kind of directions I would go down in terms of creating a compelling vision of the Dharma. Of course, we need to invent or recreate a compelling vision of the Dharma every year or every decade. I mean, just like Bhante Sangharakshita recreated a compelling vision of the Dharma for the West and for us. We need to recreate a compelling vision of the Dharma for our age, and that, in this particular kind of crisis. And of course, it will draw on the Buddhist texts, and it may emphasize certain aspects, say like interconnectedness. Perhaps also just a vision of collective enlightenment. That this is an opportunity for collective enlightenment. The potential is there in this kind of awakening, this realization that we're all connected, and that the atmosphere here, the biosphere here above Bristol, is connected with the atmosphere, with the biosphere above Moscow, and the biosphere above, Beijing, and so forth. So in a very real, very tangible way, we are connected. What we put up into the biosphere here is going to find its way, well, eventually all the way around the world, and vice versa.
One of the things I'm struck by in some of the protests that I've been to is the enjoyment, actually the focus on enjoyment, connection, creativity, culture. That actually there is a sort of enriched version of the human. There's an enriched version of culture which doesn't require consumption, for example, in order to result in pleasure, meaning, connectedness, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
So maybe that's one way of thinking about it as well.
Yeah. So from a social change perspective, we need to we need to show a different way, which is less costly and more fun, as you're saying, Dhammamegha, more fun. So it's a richer, more playful, more creative, even more meaningful. And if we put our efforts into that, creative ways of addressing this, creative ways of expressing the kind of things I've been talking about, then I'm hopeful that that will have an impact. Somebody gave me a beautiful example a few days ago. She said she used to talk about veganism, and all her friends, it's like, get off, don't get on your high horse about that, all that stuff. And then one day she just started baking really, really tasty, nutritious vegan food and offering it to her friends and her family. And who would refuse tasty, wonderful vegan food? Who would refuse that on the grounds that it was vegan? Well, actually, it turned out nobody did. And after they tasted that food, then they were willing to have a little bit of a conversation about vegans. So how can we, be as creative as that woman? And in the case of the climate and ecological emergency, what can we offer that's as tasty and nutritious as really tasty vegan food?
Baya Devi, that was your question. I can unmute you. Do you have anything else you'd like to say, or do you want to? Oh, I asked to unmute.
Yeah, hello. Yes. No. Thank you. I think it's a really tricky one, though. But you started talking about the appeal of community and interconnection, and I think that's probably a really good way to go, especially at the moment, because a lot of people have rediscovered community in lockdown, haven't they? So
right, yes,
it is present.
well, that's right. And there's this study from Wales showing that actually people's lives got happier during lockdown because there was much more of an emphasis on community during that time and mutual support. So yeah, the evidence is there. Yeah. Community, relationships, connection, those are among the things which are precious and wonderful and beautiful and, you know, make life worth living. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
We've got a question from Eric, which says, those words of Bante's are all the more surprising given some reluctance to get involved as what is seen as political action that is said to be precluded by the charitable status of Buddhist centers. And he says, a little bit later, he says, I mean some reluctance in Buddhist centers now.
Yes, so Buddhist centers, or at least Triratna Buddhist centers, are registered as charities under UK law. I don't know what I assume the situation is similar in other countries. And the activities, the political activities of charities are circumscribed. You know, they are quite carefully circumscribed by UK law. However, it's worth looking at that law and seeing what it precludes and what it doesn't preclude, because it does allow certain things and not other things. The real strength, or one of the real strengths of the Triratna community, is that we have independent centers. So we're not centrally organized in terms of centers. So every center is autonomous, has its own trustees and so forth. So it's a real strength. I see it as a real strength that each center is independent, and that they draw their own conclusions. They act in a way that they see fit. So that's a real strength. At the same time, it does mean you get quite a variation from center to center about how they address these issues or not.
So one of the things those of us who are in this community can do is get involved at our local center level in order to create opportunities for more involvement.
Yeah, I think I'd be more worried if there was a party line that everybody had to toe. I mean, would you want to be part of a movement where everybody thought the same thing? I doubt it, even on this topic. So I think that kind of acknowledging that people do have different opinions, actually from a dharmic perspective, I think that's really healthy, you know. So I'm not afraid of that kind of disagreement, and I still have a sense of connection and sort of trust in the integrity of all the members, even if they disagree with me profoundly on this topic. Yeah.
We have a question from a Bayanatri, who I happen to know comes from just north of Amsterdam.
Oh, hello.
Saying, I'm rather worried about the climate. Will my grandchildren and all children grow up in a fair world? Will this book that I've already downloaded, thank you, Abhinatri, will it help me there?
I'm confident that it will, Abhinatri, in the sense that it will support you to reflect on these topics, to kind of to understand the topics more fully, more deeply, and to reflect, give you space to reflect on them in a creative, in a creative and dharmic way, and then to ask yourself, well, how do you want to respond appropriately, or not appropriately, but proportionate to this issue. And I make some suggestions about how to do that without saying, you know, you have to do this or you have to do that. I make some suggestions, some of which I've tried out myself, and some of which I'm aware other people have tried out. And as I say, it's a multi-layered topic, so you could choose any level of that, any level of engagement in order to engage. We need people teaching the Dharma with an awareness of, you know, of the people who are coming along and what they're scared of, and we need also need people who are willing to support activists to help them find the strength to continue, to avoid burnout, basically, by teaching them meditation, by talking about ethics, particularly the metta bhavana, or any Brahma-Viharas practices. Activists need that kind of support, otherwise they'll burn out pretty quickly.
I imagine actually our children and grandchildren are likely to be ones further educating us as well.
That's right. Actually, if you engage a crowd of parents and kids, it turns out it's the kids who are trying to persuade the parents to do things, not the other way around. Yeah. They're much more aware of it because they've got longer to experience the consequences.
Thanks, Abhayanetri. Angela's got a specific question about the legislation that deals with prescription of political activities within charities. Presumably that's just the Charity Commission guidelines.
Yeah, if you go to the Charity Commission guidelines in the UK and just search for political activity, it'll give you, it'll tell you what is and isn't legal in a UK context. Yeah.
Presumably there'd be parallel legislation that governs your charity bodies in other countries. Yeah. Is that all right enough for now, Angela? Will you be able to look it up? Yeah, different in Scotland and England. Okay. Yeah, it's quite probably possible. So I think, Shantigarbha, there's we don't have any more questions. If you do have more questions, type them in the box. But I wonder if you could say a little bit about the Earth Sangha and other things that will be happening in the next while that you'll be participating in off the back of this book. And
Sure. Well, we wanted to try and create some momentum with this book, so it wasn't just an isolated incident, which would then sort of be forgotten about. So for the last 6 months or more, I've been working with a group of order members and mitras and friends in different countries to set up what we're now calling the Triratna Earth Sangha. So we found a name for ourselves that we could agree on. So the Triratna Earth Sangha. And we have a website. I don't know, Walter, if you could put a link to the Triratna Earth Sangha website in the chat in the next minute or two. And we just wanted to kind of pool our resources, so to speak, to kind of come together to try to see where we were and what we've been doing. We'd all been doing different things, but to see if there was a way of pooling our resources so that we could and there was already a Facebook group with 600 people on, called Buddhist Climate Action or something like that. So we're working with that Facebook group. And we've we're organizing a conference, an online conference, that's 24th to 26th of September, which just got promoted on the BCO, on the Buddhist Centre Online. And it turns out that we come under the European Chairs Assembly strategic priority of Dharmic engagement with political and ecological, I hope I've got it right,
social and ecological.
Social and ecological. There we go. Social and ecological issues. So so under that strategic priority, we're working with the Buddhist Centre Online, and they're hosting our conference in September. Thanks, Walter, for putting up for the Triratna Sangha. And as part of that conference, I'm having a conversation with Divan about Buddhist textual references, what support the Buddhist suttas and sutras give us, in this context, what kind of understanding, because actually there was a profound ecological understanding at the time of the Buddha, which is embodied in all sorts of ways in the Buddhist suttas and sutras. I mean, even if you just think about the Buddha's attitudes towards the natural world, towards trees. I mean, the veneration he had for trees. Trees are, in the Buddhist text, trees are protectors. Trees are homes for many, many different species. of animals and insects and birds and so on. And the Buddha made it an offense, which if you're a monk or a nun, you needed to confess. If you damaged or killed a tree, you needed to confess that. It was a confessable offense. And so basically it's care and protection for all life. There are various accounts of well, there's one account of some monks living in a wood, and they talk about how they care for their water sources, and they're very, very careful to protect the water sources that are around them, not to pollute the water sources around them, in different ways. So they had they lived out in the open. They were very, very grounded, very, very, very close to the earth, and they lived according to the lunar cycle, the monthly cycle. And it's difficult for us to get back to that. I think when we go camping, probably, or I think probably it's getting back to that sense of being close to the earth and being. And I think that's really important for us as well, that we experience that directly as possible. And just to remember that we are the earth. We are part of the earth. The earth is part of us. We're not separate. We're not separate. We ingest the earth every day. We drink the water element every day. We breathe the earth element, however many times a minute. If any of that stops, that's the end. That's the end of us. So in that kind of way, we can reflect that actually we're very close to the elements.
So kind of a disalienating practice, a kind of reversing the alienation that we have. Yeah. We've got one last question from Savajit, who's saying, some of my older friends question my XR activities, feeling we act from a power mode and force our views on others. How do you respond to such thoughts?
Well, in the book, I have a chapter on nonviolent disruption, just kind of exploring what that might mean. Sometimes you might do something a bit disruptive in order to start a conversation. The way I think of this is the protective use of force. You might do something which kind of stirs people up a bit to start a conversation. So what is crucial for me is not what you do to start the conversation. What is crucial for me is what happens then. Are you willing to listen to whatever comes back? Are you willing to listen to the people who say, well, that's, I'm not happy with that. If you want, make your point in a different way, or, don't damage property, for instance, make your point in a different way. Are you willing to listen, to even to empathize with whatever comes back? That's what makes it non-violent from my perspective. It's not so much how you express yourself. You might actually express yourself in a very powerful way, which other people might experience as angry, to get the point across. And what makes it skillful or unskillful is what you do next, how you respond to whatever comes back. So that I would move the emphasis to the point, the point of, are you willing to listen to what comes back? Are you willing to acknowledge them as human beings, to acknowledge their agency and their concerns, whether that's the freedom to move around the streets, or to get on with their business, to live their lives. Read the chapter and have a look at. I think it's an interesting issue. Sometimes we express ourselves sometimes we say something that's a bit scary for others. Sometimes we say things in order to start the conversation, which might, threaten to rupture the connection, threaten to rupture the relationship. At the same time, you might choose to express yourself in that kind of way as a way of starting a conversation. Stay for the conversation.
Savajit's given a little
okay.
thumb up.
Thank you.
Today. So Walter's put some resources in the chat, the Triratna Sangha website, information about the conference, and a link to reserve a spot at the conference, which is, I think, going to be sort of live broadcast. There's going to be other people as well, isn't it? David Loy and some other conversations, Maitri Devi, others who are going to be involved in that. So it's a sort of broader range of things about connecting with the environment and the textual resources, sort of more broad.
Yeah, and Parami is joining us for a session to talk about her approach. Yeah.
Great. So I wonder whether we should finish with a little guided reflection, since we've been talking about it. I wonder whether it would be a nice way to end with we have another sort of 10 minutes scheduled. So within that time, should we get a little thumbs up from anybody? Would you like to do that? I mean, you feel free to leave if that's not what you want to do, but I see some thumbs up there. That might be a lovely thing just to end in a more meditative way. Would you be up for leading us to do that, Shantigarbha?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay. So while you're preparing yourself, I'd just like to thank some people, particularly Walter, who started at Windhorse Publications. I can see Walter. Walter, can you spotlight yourself so you can wave? There we go. So Walter started at Windhorse Publications in May to do support this kind of work, really marketing, publicity, really getting the word out. There's our lovely Walter. Thanks, Walter.
Thank you, Walter.
And Sangadara from the Buddhist Center Online, who when last I saw was the passenger, you'll be pleased to know, driving a car back from Adhisthana. I don't know if he's gotten home yet. And thank you to the Buddhist Center Online for really making a nice splash of this. Oh, Sangadara, his his video's off. But thank you, Sangadara, that's great. So I think I wanted to thank you all for coming and participating and your thoughtful questions. And thank you for the lovely comments that I'm getting, and presumably Shantigarbha is getting personally in the messages. Thank you for all your support and for being here. And I think we'll just hand it over to Shantigarbha, and at the end of that, we'll just close the room for the night. Lovely to see you all.
Okay, so if you want to get comfortable to sit for probably about 9 minutes. We'll do a bit of grounding and then a bit of gratitude. So eyes open or closed as you wish. If you want to switch off your camera, that's also fine. Sometimes it's helpful to have a little break from seeing and being seen. So when you're ready, bring your attention within the envelope of your skin, getting an overall sense of the body. And feeling your connection through your feet, through your sitting bones to the earth. So whether you're sitting on the earth or whether you're sitting in a building, in a tall building, we can still feel our connection with the earth through the force of gravity. A sense of solidity of the earth. Feeling your sitting bones, the weight going down evenly through the sitting bones into the chair or sofa, cushion, into the earth. And allowing the earth to take your weight. Allowing the earth to take your weight. When we're considering these issues, there can be a lot of tension held in the body, and just allowing the earth to be big enough to take your weight, to be solid enough to take your weight. So we can sit solidly on the earth. Feeling the groundedness of our connection with the earth. And remembering that we are in a constant exchange with the earth elements. We take the earth element in every day, discharge it every day. And now doing the same thing with the air element. Noticing how we take the air element in through our breathing, through the nose or the mouth. We're in a constant exchange with the Earth's atmosphere, the biosphere. We can only last a few minutes without the air element. The air we breathe is breathed out by the plants and plankton on the earth and the oceans. And the air that we breathe out, carbon dioxide, is food for those plants and plankton. So we're in an exchange, a cyclical exchange with those other life forms. And we could do the same for the water element and for the fire element, heat coming from the sun, without which there would be no life on Earth. Constant exchange. And when you're ready, we can explore the topic of gratitude. So I'll ask the same question I asked those people in Trafalgar Square. What are you grateful for, being alive on this earth? What are you grateful for? If it's the smell of coffee in the morning, say that. If it's the freshness of spring, or the touch of a loved one, potential for enlightenment, when did nature stop you in your tracks with her beauty, with its beauty? How have you grown and developed? Emotionally and maybe spiritually or dharmically? So we're coming towards closing. So just finishing off, I'll ring a bell in about a minute's time. So just finishing off in whatever way you choose, then I'll ring a bell.
Thank you, Shantigarbha, for leading that, and for the book, and for all of the engagements that you're doing to support us to act proportionately in whatever way we're able and ready to do. And thank you everybody for coming along. The book is available from our website if you want to buy it, and so are the recordings. Walter's just put a link in, and I wish you all a very, very good evening, and hopefully we'll see you at some Earth Sangha events in the future. Thank you everyone for coming along tonight, or for watching this on YouTube. Go well, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.